So welcome to my session. I'm Dr. Nestori Syynimaa, and I work as a senior principal security researcher here at Secureworks Counter Threat Unit Special Operations Team. And my research is focused on Microsoft identities and cloud services and security stuff regarding that. So as we know, most of the organizations are currently using cloud services. And to make it easier for users to use and also for administrators to do the management stuff, these cloud services are quite often integrated to your on-premises services. These environments are called hybrid environments. And in this talk, I'm going to cover some challenges which are related to these hybrid environments. So let's start with the quote from Patrick Harding, who is a CTO of Ping Identity. And in interview by Wired magazine in 2013, he said that identity becomes the new security perimeter. And what does this mean? It means that in the cloud era, you really don't have anymore your, let's say, your internal network that you can protect with firewalls and so on. But instead of that, you need to protect your identities with any means you have available. So let's start talking about this new security perimeter called identities. And now here we are talking about cloud identities because we are talking about cloud services. So we have basically two kinds of identity options when we are dealing with Microsoft cloud services. And the first one is called cloud identity, which is so-called pure cloud identity or cloud-only identity. And all identity is based on Azure Active Directory or AAD, which is an identity and access management solution by Microsoft. And it's used by many organizations, including Microsoft cloud services, such as Office 365 services. They are all using this AAD as the identity provider. So this cloud-only identity, it's kind of meant for organizations that are usually small. They don't have any on-prem environment, or they are so-called cloud-born organizations. And it means that the identities are stored in Azure Active Directory. And whenever they are trying to use any service they need to type in their username and password, and they are checked against that Azure Active Directory or AAD. So that's the first identity option. The second one is called hybrid identity, which is a little bit more complex, and that's meant for, let's say, enterprise class organizations. And here the hybrid, what does this hybrid identity bring you? So it allows you to use same credentials when you are logging into cloud services than you are using in your on-prem services. And one of the crucial components here is called Azure AD Connect, which is synchronizing your identities from on-prem AD to Azure AD. So let's see how that works. So we have this Azure AD Connect component, and you could say that the sole purpose of this component is to make sure that your two directories are synchronized, which means that whenever we are adding users to on-prem AD, it is synchronized to Azure AD. And this also makes your on-prem AD what we call source of authority. So only way to get new users to Azure AD is through your on-prem AD. And this is for, let's say, easier management. It also means that if you delete user or you disable a user from your on-prem AD, it is also disabled from Azure AD. So that, let's say, quite a lot makes your management burden lower if you can only use one, let's say, place where you add users or remove users. So that's what the synchronization does here. Okay, so now we are going to talk about different authentication options what we have in hybrid environments. And the first one is called identity federation. And this was the first single sign-on solution that was available for Azure AD and Microsoft Office 365 services. And it involves a couple of servers which you need to install to be able to make this identity federation work. And usually to implement this identity federation, we are using Active Directory Federation Services or ADFS. And this option requires, or it has a quite high hardware requirement. So you should use at least 4 servers to implement this in let's say in a way that it's meant to work and for it to be highly available. And this also brings you single sign-on, which means that if you are logged in your computer and you are trying to use cloud services, you are automatically signed in. So you don't even need to type in your username and password. So all this infrastructure is going to take care of that. And well, I would say that single purpose of this is to make it easier for users to use the services. So they don't need to remember 2 sets of credentials and even when we have configured this properly, you don't even need to type in your username. Okay, the second option for using same credentials, but without single sign-on. So this is called a same sign-on. So you can use the same username and password, but there's no single sign-on here in the pure password hash synchronization. So what happens here is that the Azure AD Connect, which is the same component that is synchronizing your users, groups, and devices, it is synchronizing your password hashes. But before they are synchronized, they are rehashed with SHA-256,000 times, so that you really can't reverse that to any actual password. So only hashes are synchronized to the cloud. So that allows users to use same username and password. And this doesn't need to have any extra, let's say, hardware when compared to identity federation, because you are already using that Azure AD Connect to synchronize your users. So it's quite easy to use that also to synchronize those password hashes. And that is also recommended way to use your identities currently, or to use this as your authentication option. And then we have a third option, which is called password authentication. And this also allows you to use same credentials, but not single sign-on. So it's same sign-on also, like the password hash synchronization. And here the passwords are checked using what we call PTA agent, which is installed in your on-prem environment close to your Active Directory. And it's then connects to the cloud. And whenever user is typing password, those password is encrypted and sent to the PTA agent, which then decrypts that and tries to sign in as you to Active Directory. And if that's successful, you are able to log in. So this is the newest version, of, let's say, of these different ways where you can use the same credentials in your cloud and on-prem environment. Now, with identity federation and PTA or password authentication, there's one extra feature, which is that as you probably know, that in on-prem environment you can actually say that when the user can log in. Like for instance, there's a logon hours. So let's say that I can only log in during daytime, so I can't log in during the night, and that can only be achieved with the PTA and identity federation. Now, I mentioned that there's no single sign-on with the 2 last options, but there actually is an option where you can also implement that, and that's called seamless single sign-on. which is based on Kerberos, and you can configure that. And if you configure, then you can have the single sign-on with all of these different authentication options. Okay, so let's have a few words next about cloud security. So quite often I'm being asked, is the cloud safe? And I can say yes, the cloud is safe. It's much safer than your on-prem environment. So we have the physical security there. And if you are using services like Azure AD, you don't need to update any Windows servers there. You don't need to update any firewalls, or you don't need to update any network, let's say, devices. So it's well protected. So actually, the only way you can get in there is that you can prove who you are. So if you can prove your identity, you can access cloud services. So it's quite easy for users to use and very hard for threat actors to attack. So only way that threat actor can attack cloud-only environment is that he or she will get some users' credentials. And there's two ways in practice how you can get those. So one is phishing. So you kind of try to make the user to give their credentials to you. And the second one is using some sort of, let's say, brute force, like password spray attacks. So where you are trying to guess passwords that are quite often used, like spring 2021 or autumn 2021 exclamation mark. So that kind of passwords. And now if we compare that to hybrid security, so we have that safe cloud environment there, and then we have not so safe usually on-prem environment. And when you are connecting your on-prem services to the cloud services so let's say to have that single sign-on or same sign-on, you're actually opening a kind of a pathway between these two environments. And for threat actors, as we know, they like more on-prem environments because they are much easier to attack to. So because there are a lot of components we need to keep up to date, like operating system versions, we need to take care about network infrastructure and so on and so on. So it's much easier for them to attack your on-prem environment against these hybrid components, and via them they can then access your cloud services. And this is also what happened with SolarWinds case, if you remember. So that allowed attackers to attack SolarWinds customers' on-prem environments and breach their clouds through those components. So then what are these components and how we can protect them, and if there's anything we can do to mitigate these threats? So let's see what are the most vulnerable components in these hybrid environments. And we will start with the identity federation, so which was the first option to be able to use the same credentials in both on-prem and cloud. So here the threat actors are targeting ADFS servers, which there usually are 2 or more, and then there's components called ADFS proxies, and there should also be 2 or more of them. So at least 4 servers can be targeted. And the threat vector method here is that what threat actors want to do. So they want to export the token signing certificates from that ADFS server. And if they are able to do that, they can log in as any user of the tenant, no matter whether it's admin or user. So they can log in pretty much as any user of the tenant. And this is called golden channel attack. So how can we mitigate against them for this kind of threats? So my first advice is, well, which is actually valid for all of these threats I'm going to present to you, is that you need to treat all of these hybrid components as tier 0 servers, which means that you need to protect them at least as well as you are protecting your domain controllers. So that includes the next mitigation technique, so that you should limit access to those servers. So you don't need to be, let's say, domain admin to be able to do this. You only need to be a local admin, and you can do the bad things which in this attack scenario can be done. And one step that's not well known is that you should close port 80 or the normal HTTP traffic from non-ADFS servers, and that prevents threat actors for exporting those certificates remotely. And this attack vector can also be initiated from cloud if you are global administrator. So you should also limit the number of global administrators there. But that's a totally another story. But anyways, you should limit anyways the number of global administrators. So the second one is password hash synchronization. And here the threat actors are targeting Azure AD Connect server, which is doing the synchronization. And here they are trying to export the synchronization credentials. So they are stored in that computer. And if you have admin access to that computer, you can export those credentials. And as a result, you can elevate yourself to domain admin, because if the password hash synchronization is used with those credentials, you can actually get any hash any password hash of any user from that domain, which allows you to make or perform these pass-to-hash attacks. And here, the only mitigation method is to just limit the access to those servers, so that only limited number of admins can access that. So the next one is pass-through authentication, and here the target of the threat actors is the PTA agent, which is installed in some computer in your network, and the threat actors can then inject a DLL, or actually they can inject malicious code to running PTA agent. And if they can do that, they can then start to harvest credentials. So they can see all the credentials that are authenticated through that agent, including the passwords. And it can also be configured as a backdoor. And if they want to do that, then they just allow all the passwords, or they are accepting all the passwords. So you can log in as any user as long as you know the user's username. So the password doesn't matter in that case. And here we have the pretty much same mitigation techniques than earlier, except that this can also initiate from the cloud. So you should also limit the number of global administrators. Okay, and the last one here is that seamless single sign-on component that you could use with password hash synchronization and pass-through authentication. And here, the threat actors are targeting the Active Directory of the on-prem environment. And actually, if you are using password hash synchronization, and you can compromise that server, Azure AD Connect server, then you can extract password hashes already. So here in this attack, if you want to attack this single sign-on, you need to have hash of a certain computer account. And if we're using PHS also here, you can already get that. So it's kind of a double compromised. And if the threat actors are able to extract that password hash, they can log in as any user of the tenant. So they can create so-called silver tickets or silver Kerberos tickets. And here, the only mitigation technique is to limit access to Active Directories. Yes. So now that we know the vulnerable components, what they are, and how they can be compromised and how to mitigate them, we can conclude our presentation. So the kind of takeaway here is that identity is now the security perimeter. So because everything is moving to cloud, you really should need to protect your identities. And as we have learned, to protect your identities, you need to protect your on-prem environment, and especially those hybrid components that we walked through during the presentation. And with that, if we have any questions, do we, Chris?
Yes, we do. Thank you, Nestori. It's really interesting to get that oversight of the Microsoft identity ecosystem. I know it's been a big element in the news this year, especially after SolarWinds. So one question that has come in, kind of touching on SolarWinds, after we saw the actors there manipulate the identity ecosystems of some of their victims, how widespread a tactic is that? Are we seeing from Secureworks?
Sorry, how wide?
How widespread is the usage of that kind of tactic, like going after identity secrets?
Yeah, well, actually, I have to admit that I don't have any data regarding that, but yes, I've seen a couple of those at least. And if we are talking about this SolarWinds or SolarGate, well, they breached. Well, they could have breached, let's say, tens of thousands of customers. So it could be used quite widely, I would say.
Okay. And probably the last question we have time for, are there any other options for securing identities or any way to make us less dependent on on-prem?
Yeah, good question. So the reasons why we are connecting our on-prem environment to cloud, well, there are two reasons, and one is management, and one is for making it easier for users. And the latter one means that we want to enable them to use same passwords. So if we remove passwords, then there's no need to, integrate our environment so deeply. So you could use like FIDO keys, for instance. So that removes the requirement for password. So you don't have any passwords anymore to synchronize or to check against your on-prem AD. So that kind of moves you closer to the, let's say, cloud-only scenario where all your identity stuff is there. But you still need that synchronization so that, for instance, if user is leaving your organization, you can disable the user, and the user can't sign in even though that he or she would have the key. So I would say those might be the ways to do that.
And one quick question that is actually quite interesting I hadn't seen. So regarding identity federation attacks, if a malicious actor obtains the signing certs, does MFA deter that attack?
Actually, no, because there's a built-in feature in ADFS or identity federation, which is built for purposes that when you are having ADFS server, you can do MFA already there. So there's a technique where you can say to the cloud that I already did the MFA. So if you can compromise the ADFS server, you can create those fake SAML tokens, which include which is called claim, that is claiming that I already did MFA. So that way you can also bypass the MFA or multi-factor authentication. It's a good question. Thank you.